and welcome to another episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Andy Williams. Emily, it's just the two of us today.
Yes, Joe Redfern continues to punish herself with international travel for work purposes. So just you and me holding the fort, Andy, this week. Although last week we were all in down at Cannes down at MIPCOM in Cannes. So yes, Joe being a glutton for punishment on our way somewhere else already.
Yeah, an old-fashioned on Madison Avenue, I hope.
Yeah, that would be her style. Yeah, but all great week last week. It was a lot of fun. We obviously did our live podcast with Frank Falcone.
Yep.
We did a bit of reactions to sessions at MIPJunior. I know you had to head off on the Monday, and myself and Joe stayed through until the Wednesday.
And how was that? Was it because I just got a sense of MIPJunior, but you were there for the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. I was there for MIP grown-ups.
Yes.
We were allowed in. Yeah, I mean, I have to say the fanfare of YouTube very much continued, right? Like they were front and center. YouTube were front and center, or YouTube adjacent businesses were also very front and center in terms of the conversations that I saw. I attended the keynote with Evan Shapiro, Pedro Pina, and Jasmine Dawson, who we had.
What was the kind of the headlines for the keynote? What was the pitch?
YouTube's here. You got to show up, basically. No, we're not going to give you any money. Upfront. Let's say that. I mean, you know, they were clear about not being a buyer, right? Which is kind of a funny thing to be the key sponsor of a TV buying festival or TV buying conference and not being a buyer. You know, and that's what we know YouTube. That's what YouTube is.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is the opportunity that they bring in terms of the audience is it's undeniable, right? Like it's unignorable.
Absolutely.
People,
it's huge.
Need to appreciate that.
I thought you touched upon a lot of the interesting kind of tensions there on your Substack
Thanks, Andy.
newsletter. Yes, which was talking about just the changing relationship between producers and audiences and broadcasters and producers.
Yeah.
And in as much as previously producers would very much orientate themselves towards that relationship with the commissioner on the channel, and then the channel would kind of represent the audience to some extent, not completely, but that's really shifted, that now everyone has that relationship with the audience.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for your kind words. Yeah, this is the thing for me. It's from producer's perspective, you now have two clients, the commissioner and the audience. And it's been funny for me because obviously I was platform side for a long time. So I have always come from the practice of audience obsession and, engagement obsession, making sure shows fit and stick, whether that's through strategy or marketing, or both usually. And so that is something I've observed being out in the wild of the industry a little bit more, is that, and I think that's very clear in MIPCOM, right? So we're so lucky to do what we do. It's such a privilege in the world to be having to go to Cannes in October to do business, right? But the visibility of the spend in Cannes was very prescient for me. It was very obvious to me. It always is, by the way. But you've got these billboards going up, you've got huge installations going in everywhere. Even, the smallest booth in the Palais is an installation of sorts, right? You have dinners, you have sponsored drinks, you have, apartments being rented out, like these, mega gorgeous beachfront apartments being rented out, at tens of thousands of pounds. So, that investment in the business to business relationship has always been a really key part of the game. And my point in my Substack was like, people need to think about that investment from an audience perspective as well, because very often I speak to producers and studios, and they know how many animators it's going to take to do a show. They know how many scriptwriters they're going to need. They know how many, what series direction they want. They know all these things, and they know they're going to go to MIPCOM. They're going to shop at a cartoon forum. They're going to do this, and this, and this, and this. And those are all investments. But when it comes to investing in strategy, investing in that audience relationship, that appreciation of the value and the investment needed can sometimes fall, or quite often, should I say, falls on, oh, really? Oh, can I not just put it on YouTube and that will happen? And the answer is no, you can't. And listen, we can get into the other issues with kids and YouTube too, but like, that was something for me where, you're seeing this outlay of investment on, very physically, should I say, in Cannes, and having an appreciation of what that is going to cost, and how, you can do certain things with the audience, and it's not like we're asking somebody to have like $1 million marketing budgets to reach audiences, but there are certain efficient things you can do that require a minimum viable amount of investment. It doesn't have to be, millions. YouTube in particular being one area where you can make a constrained investment in doing the minimum. I say minimum viable thing. Minimum and viable are both equally important words. But it's back to this thing of spending, 2 million on a series and $0 on
Marketing.
marketing it, or embedding it with the audience. Marketing's evolving, really, like, because yes, marketing, like pure good old fashioned marketing, listen, it's still definitely great and has a point, but like, marketing is anything that's audience engagement, and
Yep.
2 million on a series, $0 on that audience engagement piece, and build it and they will come, is risky.
Yeah, and I think all of those are hallmarks of a kind of rapidly evolving market in some ways. I was struck by when I went this year, I was struck by a couple of things. One is that, I mean, the point that you were talking about, that change in relationship, is it is a B2B market. But
MIPCOM.
yeah, but it's not like a business to consumer market, if that even exists. But I think there's a lot of confusion from all sides in terms of what each of those businesses are and how they relate to each other in some ways. Because I think in the old days, the relationship would be relatively simple, in as much as you needed to snare a broadcaster
Yeah,
to
you
get
needed to
your.
sell the show to the
Yeah,
broadcaster. Yeah.
and then they often had a relatively captive audience, so they didn't need to necessarily work as hard on the marketing.
Well,
And I
we worked
feel
pretty
like,
hard in the marketing, but yeah, like,
yeah,
I know what you're saying.
but I think I think what you were talking about before, about that you get some shows where there just isn't any money spent on the marketing. That's partly because the marketing would be sort of hidden often. It would be their in-house promo department that would do the
Yes,
marketing for the
yes.
show, and there'd be off the book marketing.
Yeah, but below the line marketing.
Yeah, and so people didn't really place it necessarily a value on it, and there was a lot of stuff that was just assumed, and I feel like we're
Yeah.
entering into an area where none of those assumptions are kind of working, and so people are having to kind of work out what's fit for purpose now.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think that the machination of linear broadcasting was a lot more quantifiable, steady, um, clear cut, right? And you might gripe. Well, I definitely had gripes coming my way at Disney. Yeah, my show's at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's not like prime time. But at least knew it was on 6 a.m. in the morning every single day. And at least you knew that you could ask for it to be on. You could ask for it to be on at 7 a.m. and that might give you a better slot, right? Like, it's a bit clearer. Whereas I think in premium streaming, the idea of discovery is really challenging. And I do bang on about this, but it's, you know, how can you quantify your discoverability? It's really difficult. Beyond the trending top 10, it's really
Yeah,
difficult. And the new. So, day one, you'll probably hit the new rail. And if you do well off the new rail, you'll hit the trending rail. But after that, it's really unclear what real estate your IP is getting with kids. And that's, the other thing I'm hearing is that, like, programming strategy in streaming is very unclear, and it's kind of algorithmically led as opposed to editorially led. I'm ranting about this for another piece I'm working on this week because Netflix earnings are tonight. But editorially led for streaming would be something like, something actually YouTube talked about in MIPJunior, which is day parting. Hey, if you tune in, if you're tuning into the platform on a Monday morning, you're going to want something different than what you were watching on a Sunday night, because Sunday night viewing, at least in my house, is
yeah,
a glass of wine and a Chinese takeaway and watching, a Game of Thrones level type of show.
yeah, absolutely.
And Monday morning is give me a kids show that I can get out the door to, and maybe the news, and at maximum something kind of, I don't know, fluffy or whatever, right? Like, it's Monday, I need to pick me up, right? So, but what the problem is, you go to premium streaming, they're still going to serve you Game of Thrones on a Monday morning. Nobody wants Game of Thrones on a Monday morning,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
So that thing of day parting, editorial day parting, is a very linear, you would say
Yeah.
old fashioned approach. But
Yep.
sliced bread is also old fashioned, and it still works really well.
Yes.
Um, so that's the
Best
thing. But
things
it's
in
also,
sliced bread.
you know,
Yeah.
but so yeah. Anyway, sorry, I rant
Yeah,
on
I
about
mean,
this forever.
it's funny, isn't it? When you were describing that, I was thinking this is probably a bit of a stretch in terms of an analogy, but I almost feel like the
I
channel
just did
era.
sliced bread, Andy. Okay, you can't. I'm
Sorry?
not. I just did sliced bread, so I think you're fine. Go with it.
Well, it almost feels like the channel era was that was the era of representative democracy. And then we've moved into an era of direct democracy, which is just which completely sidesteps those representative figures where they just go straight
Yeah,
to the outcome. And I feel like there's a certain amount of chaos that comes with direct democracy. And there's some stability in that representative democracy of channels. I've stretched that analogy as far
speakers.
as
You
it's
brought
going to
in
go.
politics. I mean, we don't tend to bring up politics in this show, but you found a way to do it
Yeah.
in a neutral.
But I suppose that so when you have like Nickelodeon or Disney,
Mm,
they also represent the audience, and they represent a specific strand of an audience. And
yeah, yeah.
and I feel like the streaming era, we've kind of lost those signposts a bit.
Yeah, totally. Because the other thing I'm asking as well is, like, if it's algorithmically driven, like, what data are those algorithms using, right? YouTube's using Google's massive data empire. I was just signing into something before we were getting on this call. Where my Google login is used to log into yet another app or whatever. And I'm like, all right, well, they're going to see what I'm doing in this app too. When it comes to any of the premium streaming services, I'm not saying they don't have any data. They do have some user data, but nothing compared to Google's vast,
Absolutely.
um, kingdom. I would even call it it's a planet of
Yeah, yeah,
data. Um, because people aren't really using those streaming services for anything other than watching TV. And, and I would say they're not even using them to watch trailers on, really. Like, if you're going to watch a trailer, if you're going to sample something, you tend to go to YouTube or TikTok. So I don't know what those algorithms need data to do their thing. If they're not going to be editorially curated, to be told, hey, it's Monday morning, like, let's not have like violence and nudity front and center.
yes,
Or if you're on a kids thing, it's Monday evening, let's surface some wind down shows, whatever. If there's not going to be that editorial backbone to it, what in data is really driving need states? Because there's,
yeah,
what you're doing on a streaming platform is pretty limited. If you think of the amount of clicks you make in a Google ecosystem on a daily basis, it's got to be multiples of what you're going to do in a streaming service on a daily
yeah,
basis.
without doubt.
Yeah.
But do you think? And so, with all of that, do you think there's scope for YouTube to almost, now that it's talking about becoming more of a staple of the living room
Yes.
connected TV, do you think that opens up the space for them to almost act a bit more like a traditional broadcaster in terms of having schedules and day parts?
I think it was interesting to hear Google were open to it, like YouTube were open to it. I think YouTube's discovery interface is much more intuitive based on the data that they know. Like they seem to understand more about what you might want to watch that's related to something else, or what you might want to rewatch, I would say,
Yeah,
which is something that, again, is a frustration of many parents from premium streaming, is that the second their kid finishes the movie's like, you're done, you watch it, but kids
yeah,
don't watch movies that way. They rewatch it, rewatch. Um, so yeah, I mean, what we heard is that YouTube are making plays. YouTube saw the opportunity of the living room, and they saw that they had a foothold there, and they continued to make moves to get there. I know we had Ian Whitaker on a few weeks ago. He is a great distiller of the conversation, to at least on certain points. And I know he distilled this down to, they want TV's ad dollars. because they're not growing any more digital ad dollars, and that represents an opportunity. But they're, you know, I think actually one of YouTube's killer opportunities or killer instincts, should I say, is that they have remained focused on their tech platform and how their tech platform serves users. They haven't actually gotten distracted by trying to become a studio at all, even though I know they've tried it a few times. Whereas someone
Quite
like Netflix,
half-hearted though, anyway.
hmm?
It was quite half-hearted how much they went into the studio though. I mean, they did
Yeah.
it, but
I mean, they spent 200 million on kids content, but
they did. Yeah.
but
Okay,
that's like
when
a
you put it
coffee.
like that.
That's like a coffee for them. They're making like 30 billion a year in ad
Yeah.
spend. So that's like 200 million is like, it's fine. But the thing is, I think some of the Netflix being the OG tech company in premium streaming has kind of gotten distracted by becoming a studio and isn't focusing on enhancing their product. Whereas I think YouTube is quite obsessed with, what their platform looks like. And then the other studios who are studios by nature, someone like Disney, like they've always been a studio, so they're kind of having to evolve to be a tech company, which is, I give them a little bit more grace in that because you will always orientate back to the thing you know. But they're doing it 5 years now, so they're the grace period might be expiring. Yeah, so no, but if YouTube continued to gain ground, um, they continue to yeah to gain ground. I mean, some people will be like, they're not dominant, they're only this amount percentage or whatever, and like,
Yeah.
but they are the biggest. It's not a dominant position, but they are the biggest, and their progress in gaining ground on US TV screens, which we can see through Nielsen, is very consistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if
And I
they're
feel
coming
like
down
it
to MIPCOM to go give us all your long form content, then you know,
yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to see how they positioned themselves. It was very much we're we're a partner for prestige, sort of
yeah,
broadcaster-based content, really.
yeah, and that
How
makes
did
sense because
what were you were
that's something.
there, you kinda were there for the whole week. What was your how did it what were the what's the contrast between how how it felt for MIP Junior and how it felt for more of the kind of the main stage of MIP?
For MIPCOM. Yeah, I mean, MIPJunior is, I think, is a great little ecosystem for kids producers to get together and to have that focus because you definitely get drowned out in the bigger sessions and I've done this at conferences where like they have all the like they have all the main stuff and then it's like, we'll get the kids person in to do kids and everyone's like, okay, a lot of the ones are there like, you know, so I do think there needs to be a balance between us people in kids media chatting in our own
Yeah,
circles constructively versus getting drowned out in a bigger wider entertainment environment, but at the same time I think only chatting in our own circles can sometimes mean we're just echo chambering and
yeah,
moving the conversation forward, it just isn't happening because it's not being tabled in the right type of context. The sessions at MIPCOM were valid for any kids TV producer. Like, um, you know, I think YouTube were definitely much more open to conversations at MIPCOM, right?
right.
They had a
What
dedicated lounge
respect
upstairs.
what would those conversations what would be the kind of the gist of the conversations that producers or channels could have
I
with
don't know. I
YouTube?
think they literally had a lounge upstairs where you could go up and ask questions. I happened upon it just because I was running early for a meeting. I was like, I'm gonna go check this out. But they seem to be there in a capacity of reassurance, right?
Right.
Like, we're not big, we're not scary, let's have a chat. But the bottom line with kids is, and they were obviously part of MIP Junior, although they weren't like the keynote session with YouTube and Miraculous ended up being YouTube asking Miraculous
Yeah.
the questions, which my expectation of a keynote from YouTube was that they might answer some questions themselves, although they did answer one or two towards the end. So I think it's awkward when they put themselves in front of kids producers because there's problems that we all know about, right? The monetization, safety, what they say versus content quality principles versus what people may see happen. So yeah, there's lots of different things happen. What did you think? What was your producer's view of Luke Junior?
Well, I thought it was I mean, the interesting thing with something like MIP and MIP Junior is that its its main appeal to producers is it's a way to meet buyers.
Yeah,
And there is an element where sometimes it feels a little bit like musical chairs, where um, the number of buyers have got smaller as the years have gone on, and the chairs haven't been kind of replaced.
Mm,
And so, as a producer, it's an interesting time where the conversation is shifting more and more to that direct access to the audience via platforms like YouTube. But it then becomes a bit ambiguous in terms of what's the reason for being of an event like MIP, because part of it is that it gets you in the room with buyers.
mm,
And so I feel like that's something that as a producer, you're having to try and kind of get your head around what that means in terms of the changing landscape, what YouTube's position is in that
they're not
market
buying.
as
They were
a
pretty
concept.
they were open about
Yeah,
that
yeah,
in
so they're not a buyer. So yeah, I found it really interesting. There was lots of exciting conversations, but the big question remains who's buying?
mm,
And I think that's a challenge for producers and is particularly a challenge for small distribution companies, I think, are going through a very tough time because the number of the musical chairs situation, the number of buyers is definitely shrinking for them, and it becomes it becomes a challenge. And so that's one of the questions I went to MIP, and I didn't necessarily have an answer for where it's heading. And I thought it kind of raises some questions in terms of how a market like MIP evolves in that
mm.
environment. And I think they're doing an incredible job of trying to adapt to those changing dynamics, but they're a challenge.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Do you think an environment like that is a good place to meet a buyer though? Because I was speaking with folks there, and like if your buyer's on their 50th meeting of the day, you know, uh, meeting of the minds is maybe less likely to be on the cards.
Yeah, well, I thought there were I had a lot of encouraging conversations from people that felt that it worked better having moved MIPJunior to where they'd moved it. That in some ways having a space that was a bit more contained meant that you could meet everyone you wanted to meet, and actually the slightly more intimate scale of it. I know a lot of producers actually found that quite productive because it meant that you could then meet everyone that you needed to meet.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the other thing that was interesting about this year at MIP is that there's been, for the last couple of years, I think a lot of established producers are now getting their heads around the fact that they've got to really engage and get their heads around how to work and operate on YouTube. I think for some of the established producers, there's been a lot of resistance for that. Now everyone you meet is basically they've completely accepted that even if they're doing a commission with a broadcaster, they need to have a program YouTube strategy in
Mm,
place to really be able to kind of maximize the opportunity there and potentially be in a situation where they need to kind of think like a broadcaster themselves in terms of how they use YouTube for their product.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And I think and so I think that's YouTube coming in with more of a sort of a marquee presence, I think is well timed because I think everyone's very receptive to that conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, like listen, it's a challenging time for the industry, honestly. And, I think like I remain ever flying the flag of yes, but in kids is different. Like for the wider industry who are able to monetize on YouTube properly, there is a way forward,
Yeah,
Um, but for people who are subject to, like for producers or content or IP that's subject to MFK restrictions, then the monetization opportunity rightly isn't there. We understand why that's not there, but like, how do you build a business? And
well, totally.
making a YouTube presence as a play for toy or consumer products is just a hail mary on a hail mary,
Yeah,
and that's not a strategy.
yeah. And there
So
was definitely a lot of conversations where I mean, Joe moderated a really interesting discussion with the Claynosaurs, Nick Cabana and
yeah,
And they ended up sort of discussing really kind of how that kind of YouTube ends up being part of kind of an overall strategy for your IP. And I felt like that's more and more people, and kids are particularly thinking like that. They're thinking, how can we get any revenue from merchandise? But I always worry that people overestimate the return on merchandise. And I feel like we still need,
and the solidity of it as well. Like, it's
yeah,
not like that's way there's no algorithm for merchant.
yeah, yeah. And so it still needs the programs to make money.
Yeah, they need to at least be self-sustaining, and then that's icing on the cake, you know? Lots of icing sounds great, but, as a reason to be, that's kind of a challenge.
Yeah.
Andy, we've no answers.
Well, no, lots of questions.
Lots of questions. But listen, I think having the conversations there, I think is important.
Thanks very much for listening, guys. Hope you got some value from that. And if you get value from the podcast, please like and subscribe. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And we will see you next